Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the joint general session of the ISO Board of Governors and WEIM governing body. Please note that all lines are muted until the public comment portion of the session. With that, I'll turn the conference over to Roger Collinton with the California ISO. Please go ahead.
Thank you, operator. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. Let me go ahead and start out calling our meeting to order, and I will take the roll call of the governing body and the WEIM. Chair Bhagwat.
Present.
Governor Borenstein.
Present.
Chair Decker.
Present.
Member Fong.
Present.
Governor Galitova.
Present.
We're the on silent issue, right? We all do it. Member Gardner.
Present.
Vice Chair Konzioka.
Present.
Vice Chair Leslie.
Present.
Member Prescott.
Present.
And Governor Shorey.
Present.
Thank you, governors and governing body members. We do have a quorum of both bodies, and we may proceed. And so let me turn it over to you, Chair Decker, and then to Chair Bhagwat for your introduction.
All right, thank you, Roger. So I want to welcome everyone who's made time to call in today. This is the joint session of the Cal ISO Board of Governors and the Western Energy Imbalance Market governing body. There are a number of initiatives within the joint authority that are underway, and several of them are part of the agenda today, in addition to an update on the Governance Review Committee as it applies to the extended day-ahead market. We really appreciate all the stakeholder engagement in all of the initiatives at this point. It is your Western market, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chair Bhagwat.
Thank you, Nita, and thank you, Roger. I want to second my welcome to everybody and my thanks for your participation. I'm actually happy to say that this has now become a regular event, and we seem to have sort of the logistics for joint meetings well in hand, and I thank everybody for developing that and look forward to more joint meetings. Roger.
Thank you, Chair Bhagwat, Chair Decker. The first item on the agenda is for public comment, and this item is regarding public comment for any items that are not specifically identified on the agenda. So, operator, if you can seek public comment at this moment.
If you would like to make a public comment, please click on the raise hand icon at the bottom of the Zoom window. You will be unmuted when it is your turn. At that time, please then state your name and affiliation before stating your question. It looks like we have no public comments at this time.
Thank you, operator. The next item on the agenda is the joint general session minutes from February 9th, 2022, and this will, as our other joint motions, be exactly that, a joint motion of both bodies. So if I can have a motion to approve the February 9th, 2022 joint general session minutes.
So moved. Oh, this is Val.
Thank you.
Sorry, Dan.
And second?
I'll second it. Second first, I'll second it.
Thank you. Thank you. And Governor Bhagwat, or Chair Bhagwat, your vote, please.
Aye.
Governor Borenstein.
Aye.
Chair Decker.
Aye.
Member Fong.
Aye.
Governor Galitova.
Aye.
Member Gardner.
Aye.
Vice Chair Konzioka.
Aye.
Vice Chair Leslie.
Aye.
Member Prescott.
Aye.
And Governor Shorey.
Aye.
Thank you. The motion passes as both boards have passed the motion. Next item on our agenda, I turn to you, Elliot, for our CEO report.
Thank you very much, Roger, and good afternoon to the Board of Governors and the WEIM governing body members and our partners and stakeholders joining us today. I really appreciate the opportunity to just highlight several of the elements of my fairly lengthy and detailed CEO report submitted on March 9th. As you can see, there is a lot happening at the moment, a lot of really excellent, productive, and collaborative work underway. And I did want to call out a number of these initiatives because I think they've been quite consequential, and each and every one of them has really involved a tremendous amount of work and partnership and collaboration, both with organizations here inside of California and really across the West. First of all, I wanted just to, again, express my appreciation to the California Energy Commission, the CPUC, many folks inside the state and across the West who helped us produce our first 20-year transmission outlook. This is a time when long-term transmission planning is of extremely high interest across the country, and we're very pleased to get this work product out. The transmission plan it's our first attempt to try to characterize the long-term architecture and big choices facing California in terms of its transmission infrastructure. It's based off of the resource assumptions going into the SB 100 process at the Energy Commission, and it really is an effort to take a look at both the in-state, offshore, and out-of-state transmission alternatives that will become increasingly available to California over time, and to try to do a better job of synchronizing long-term transmission planning, resource procurement, and interconnection queuing, and taking some of the friction out of the system and having all those processes work as efficiently as possible. And we've just really appreciated the partnership with many folks to make this first issue of the 20-year outlook, I think, quite successful. It's now, we're consolidating public comment, and we'll have our final version of that first draft out here shortly. I also wanted just to mention, we did take a shot at estimating some of the transmission costs. We had a $30 billion number in that plan. That's a big number. It definitely caught some folks' attention. I think it's also important to contextualize that investment and to remember that, first of all, you have to look at that transmission investment as being able to enable an enormous amount of new generating capacity. Actually, the planning assumptions embedded in the plan talk about as much as 120 gigawatts of new resources by 2040. It's also important to remember that investment will be staged over 20 years. It will be amortized over long-lived assets. And it really is going to be, I think, essential to the continued health of California's $3 trillion a year economy and making sure that the state can meet its long-term energy policy goals reliably, affordably, and equitably. So thanks again to everybody that made that possible, and we're really looking forward to the next steps in that synchronization. Of course, at the same time, and tomorrow we'll be advancing for a formal vote, we've produced our updated 10-year transmission plan in the 2021-2022 process. We are advancing forward 24 projects for system expansions, upgrades, and reinforcements that will be needed over the next decade for a total cost of $2.9 billion. This will enable a significant amount of new resource base, tidy up reliability in some load pockets, and I think start moving out on that next generation of transmission infrastructure as we build out towards the long-term view in the 20-year outlook. So we're looking forward to the conversation on that tomorrow. Moving over to our market development activities, this is going to be a pivotal week for the extended day-ahead market stakeholder process. This Friday, we will sort of come up for air after this big first push here over the first 3 months of 2022. We will take stock of the work products from each of the 3 subgroups that have been working diligently on transmission and resource efficiency and greenhouse gas accounting. I just wanted, again, to thank so many people who've been participating in our stakeholder process, so many excellent ideas, so much great input, and we will now turn to the process of synthesizing that input into the straw proposal that will come out towards the end of April, and then drawing some distinctions around those issues that we'll still need to work on very collaboratively across the balance of the spring and into the summer. At the Friday meeting, there will also be an update from Therese Hampton on what's happening with respect to the Governance Review Committee. It's important, want to make sure that everybody has a sense of exactly how the market design and the governance work are working in tandem simultaneously. And of course, later today, we're going to hear, I believe, from Rebecca Wagner on the very latest outcomes from the WEIM Governance Review Committee. I know they're processing a lot of comments that came in last week, and we'll look forward to hearing about the next steps on that front as well. We're now here towards the tail end of March, which means that summer is not too far away, so we're really stepping up our summer readiness activities. I think the fundamentals are something we're looking at very closely. Obviously, we're acutely following the hydro conditions. Last year, that was a major variable. This year started out very positively in the Sierra. We had 160% of average snowpack in December. We then turned around and had the driest January and February on record. So we're now back to a below average snowpack in California, keeping a close tabs on the hydro conditions out of state as well. But I think in general, we feel a little bit better positioned than we were last year. I wanted just to quote to you a couple of numbers. Last year there was a significant amount of additional procurement of resources on the California grid. This is a result of, I think, a tremendous sense of urgency from the CPUC and the other local regulatory authorities in California. In 2021, we added 5,426 megawatts of new capacity to the California grid. That's the largest amount of new resources brought on record. That included 2,419 megawatts of storage resources, the vast majority of which were utility-scale battery installations. And by June 1st of this year, we're actually anticipating approximately 4,000 megawatts of additional resources to be online, and including another couple thousand megawatts of storage. So right now, our big focus in California with respect to net peak capacity and really addressing those post-sunset hours is a big focus on dispatchable batteries. That's a big part of the strategy here, and we're looking forward to getting more of that onto the system. I think in the big picture, although we remain guardedly optimistic for the summer, we are still exposed to that real west-wide heating event. Probably the hours of biggest concern remain the latter part of the summer into September, when you have the declining runoff, you have lower solar production, and you can still have some very hot temperatures, and the resource adequacy stack diminishes. So we're working very closely with the state agencies and industry to really keep tabs of the stack analysis. We'll, of course, be updating our summer outlook here in April. And on April 27th, we will be hosting another summer readiness leadership roundtable with many of the utilities and our partners in adjacent service territories, just to make sure we all have as best a handle on what we're looking at in terms of fundamentals going into the summer, and to maximize operational coordination and communication, including some tabletop exercises in advance of the summer. Obviously, readiness and coordination are just absolutely essential to be able to ride through the now, I think, unpredictable volatility and even the potential of fires to disrupt the bulk electricity grid. Back on March 2nd, we were extremely pleased to welcome 2 more utilities to the Western Energy Imbalance market. It was my pleasure to get an email from Khalid Abdul Rahman at about 3 o'clock in the morning telling us that we had successful go-lives for both Avista and Tacoma Power. Fabulous outcomes. Big kudos and thanks to their teams for doing just remarkable job of preparing their utilities for implementation. They just did a fabulous job, absolutely seamless implementations. And of course, later this spring, on early May 3rd, we are looking forward to welcoming the Bonneville Power Administration and Tucson Electric to the family of WEIM entities. Those are going to be very, very important milestones for all of us. We're really looking forward to that. And by the end of this year, the WEIM will have 19 members serving nearly 77% of the demand for electricity in the western United States. And I think we're getting closer and closer every day to that $2 billion mark of gross EIM benefits since inception back in 2014. Just absolutely stellar, and just could not be more pleased to have these partners working with us on this market. It's just been a source of tremendous value to all of us. I did want to just mention, make sure everybody had a chance to see. If you haven't seen yet, we felt it was, given the huge increase of battery storage on the California grid last year, we hired a documentary film company, and we produced a video about the sort of policy history and the advent of large-scale storage on the California grid. A real nod to those policy pioneers who made this resource possible as it now really grows. Really enjoyed that, appreciated that collaboration. You can find links to that video on our website, on our Energy Matters blog, or right directly out to the CAISO's YouTube site. And again, just a real privilege to be able to tell that story and to honor all the people that have been making this resource development possible. And of course, our storage enhancements initiative continues to evolve our market design and our commitment to really helping not only the 4-hour duration batteries, but starting to think about longer duration storage and even other chemistries, which are going to play an increasingly important role on the market. I did note in my CEO report, of course, we all, I think in the industry, continue to stay at a heightened state of security with respect to cyber protections, watching very carefully. And of course, we are all now in the stage of trying to figure out exactly what our next move will be with respect to the return to the building. We continue to watch the epidemiology and watch what's happening with the statistics, and we actually have been reaching out to our workforce and really doing a very, very latest survey of all their interests and their opinions and their preferences with respect to return to the building. So we'll have more to report out on that next month. But all of us, I think, looking forward to spending some time together in our facility. Finally, I just wanted to go straight into the last item on my CEO report and segue into a motion with respect to the Market Surveillance Committee appointment, which is a recommendation for reappointment of Dr. Benjamin Hobbs. As noted, Dr. Hobbs has served as a member of the ISO's Market Surveillance Committee since 2002. His current term expires on March 31st, 2022. During his tenure on the MSC, Dr. Hobbs has provided invaluable expertise and advice to the ISO Board of Governors, the Western EIM governing body, the ISO management and staff on numerous issues relating to the operation of the ISO market. Under the tariff and the new joint authority construct, the ISO CEO recommends joint approval by the ISO Board of Governors and WEIM governing body for MSC appointments. Therefore, as outlined in the joint ISO Board of Governors and WEIM governing body memo, I request that the ISO Board of Governors and WEIM governing body approves the reappointment of Dr. Hobbs as a member of the MSC and authorize execution of a contract for a 3-year term. Yes. So
thank you.
Thank you, Roger. And so thanks for the opportunity to present that information. And Roger, I'll turn it back to you for the public comment. And if we need return back, if there are any other questions, but that concludes my CEO report. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Elliot. And at this point, if there's any questions from the the WEIM governing body or from the board, please speak up.
I'd just like to make a statement that I welcome the reappointment of Dr. Hobbs. He has been fabulous. His work is great. And it's always wonderful to see him highlighting the successes in the operation of the ISO market at various conferences. So very happy to see that he's willing to continue working with us and doing the great job that he's doing.
Thank you, Governor Glitova. Any other questions or comments from either the board or the WEIM governing body? Not seeing any. Let's, operator, if you can see if there's any public comment, please.
Once again, if you would like to make a public comment, please click on the raise hand icon at the bottom of the Zoom window, and please state your name and affiliation before stating your question. Looks like we have no public comments at this time.
Thank you, operator. I'm sorry, is there a comment? I heard some, I'm not sure if that was just background noise. Okay, well with that we can move to the motion. Move that the ISO Board of Governors and the WEIM governing body reappoint Dr. Benjamin Hobbs to the ISO Market Surveillance Committee for a 3-year term to end March 31, 2025, and move that the Chief Executive Officer is authorized and directed to enter into an appropriate consulting agreement with Dr. Benjamin Hobbs to compensate him for his participation on the ISO Market Surveillance Committee. And if I may have a motion, please.
Moved.
Second.
Anita first and Severin second. Governor Bogwat, your vote, please. Chair Bogwat. Governor Borenstein, your vote.
Aye.
Chair Decker.
Aye.
Member Fong.
Yes.
Governor Glitova.
Yes.
Member Gardner.
Yes.
Vice Chair Konzioka,
Aye.
Vice Chair Leslie,
Aye.
Member Prescott,
Aye.
and Governor Shorey.
Aye.
Thank you, governing body members and board members. The motion passes. The next item that we have on our agenda is agenda item number 5, which is the WEIM Governance Review Committee update. And to introduce this topic is Stacey Crowley, our Vice President of External Affairs.
Good afternoon, Board of Governors and the WEIM governing body. I am here to just briefly introduce Rebecca Wagner, who's the Vice Chair of the WEIM Governance Review Committee. She's going to provide a brief update on their activities, and I will turn it over to Rebecca. Thank you.
Thank you, Stacey, and good afternoon, governors and members of the Western EIM governing body. It's so good to be back with you and see you all. It's been a while. As Stacey said, I'm Rebecca Wagner. I'm filling in for Therese Hampton today, and thankfully it's only just today because those are big shoes to fill. I just have a brief update from the GRC. We met in a public meeting on February 17th where we provided some background on our mission as it relates to the exploration of EDAM, really setting the stage for how we were going to approach our work in earnest and in parallel with the market design component. We posed 4 questions to the stakeholders and asked for their comments on what elements may be implicated by the EDAM market design issues. Those questions were set up so that the interested parties could respond by comment, which came in a week ago on March 9th. And members of the GRC, myself included, are digging through all of those comments and reviewing them and trying to assess what comes next. In order to facilitate a deep dive into the issues, we formed 4 working groups as we've done in the past, so it kind of spreads the workload and we can each take a deep dive into the areas that are of interest to us and have our expertise. As you noted earlier, or I think Elliot noted earlier, the chair of the GRC, Therese Hampton, will provide an update on our activities at a public EDAM market design meeting on March 18th, this Friday. Tomorrow, you'll see a notice. I think it's tomorrow, maybe. I see so many ISO notices, but I think it's coming out tomorrow. Sorry, Stacey. In the daily briefing that we have just scheduled our next public session for March 31st at 11:30, which we'll do by virtual format and give us our first opportunity to dig in after the comments have been filed. We'll receive a EDAM market design or a briefing from the EDAM market design team and get started on our next steps with engagement of our stakeholders. We're also looking at another meeting in late April, and we'll get that on the calendar as soon as we can. I'm happy to answer any questions or dodge them and pass them off to Stacey if necessary, but it's good to see you all, and I'm available for questions.
Thank you, Rebecca. Any questions or comments from the board or the governing body?
Well, I do have my hand raised, but I don't know if it's visible. This is Val. I just wanted to say hello to Rebecca and to thank her very much for her continued efforts on this GRC governance. The whole governance committee is it comprises very amazing folks who are willing to take on the extra duties of the GRC in addition to their already existing duties. It's good to see you.
Good to see you too, Val. We're going to miss you.
Thank you, Val. I don't see any other hands raised, but is there any other comment or questions from the governing body or the board?
This is Anita. And Rebecca, we've not had a chance to meet in person, but I really do want to say that reading through the comments that have just come in and the work that you guys have ahead of you, there is a lot in there. unpack for sure. Could you just tell us the 4 working groups, what the 4 are, please?
Sure. Making sure I'm off mute. They are the delegation of authority and dispute resolution. These largely follow our previous ones. Legal constructs, really examining what our bookends of the art of the possible to the degree that we can go within the confines of California law. The stakeholder working group looking at BOSSR and the Regional Issues Forum. And then finally, decisional classification and the durability of delegation. So, and then we also left the questions that we posed open-ended to other ideas in case we missed it. And so I haven't parsed out all of the comments directing them to which working group, but there's usually some catch-all stuff that we'll need to cover, and we'll figure that out as when we regroup.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. At this time, operator, if you could check for public comment.
All right. Once again, if you do have a comment, please click on the raise hand icon. All right. Looks like we have no public comments at this time.
Excellent. Thank you. Next item, agenda item number 6, is the decision on reliability demand response resource bidding enhancements. And before I turn it over to Anna Mckenna for introduction, let me note that there was a public comment letter received that has been provided to the governing body as well as the Board of Governors from the California Efficiency and Demand Management Council. So that, for the record, has been received and sent to the governing body and the board. To you, Anna Mckenna.
Thank you, Roger, and good afternoon, Board of Governors, WEIM governing body members, colleagues, and members of the public. I'm pleased to introduce today's decision item on the first phase of the reliability demand response resource bidding enhancements. This comes to you as a joint decisional item under our governance classification. I'll shortly turn it over to Greg Cook, Executive Director of Market and Infrastructure Policy. He's going to walk you through the proposal carefully, but before I do, I did want to take a moment to thank stakeholders and the ISO staff for working through these proposed changes. I also wanted to note that we're continuing our efforts in this area, and we'll be coming back to you with additional changes on RDR integration into our market, and we look forward to working with stakeholders on this next set of changes. With that, I will now ask Greg Cook to walk us through the proposed changes.
Thank you, Anna. So good afternoon, everyone. So this is our decision on the reliability demand response resource enhancements. So I'll be referring to those as RDRR since it's a bit of a mouthful. And so RDRRs these are emergency triggered demand response resources. And we currently have rules in place that are designed to limit the dispatch of these resources. And, there's really 2 primary ways in which we do that. One, we only include them in the market during system emergencies. And then when they are included in the market, they're also required to be included at high bid price. And we currently have rules that say that has to be at least 95% or higher of our $1,000 bid cap. And again, a lot of this was to ensure that, again, to limit the dispatch of these resources and only dispatch them after the real-time market has exhausted bids from other resources. Now, this proposal that we have today falls under the joint authority of the Western EIM governing body and the board, because even though these RDRRs are only used in the California ISO balancing authority area by CPUC load-serving entities, EIM balancing authority areas could use the RDRR model if they were to get approval from their own local regulatory authorities and would be able to meet the requirements of the RDRR participation. Next slide, please. So again, the rules, the intended dispatch of the RDRRs is also going to be impacted by the rules that we adopted last year that will allow bids up to $2,000. And so starting off with a little background. So back, 10 years or so ago, the ISO adopted rules designed to align with CPUC approved settlement. The ISO was part of that settlement at the time, and the settlement set the framework for how these resources would be dispatched through the ISO's real-time market. You know, some of the main provisions out of that settlement were that the RDRRs would only be dispatched in emergencies, and the settlement also had a recognition that the underlying customers that provide this demand response generally have costs well in excess of conventional supply resources, and I think even potentially in excess of our current bid cap as well. And so as a result of that, in part of the agreement was to limit the dispatch that the real-time market bids would be at least 95% of the $1,000 bid cap, or they could submit bids between $950 and $1,000. We did leave some wiggle room in there to allow the scheduling coordinators to differentiate the bids among the resources. And then, as you recall, last year we changed our market rules to comply with FERC Order 831, and this requires we now will allow bids up to $2,000 a megawatt hour if we have verified costs above $1,000, and we also, as part of those provisions, would allow import bids up to $2,000 under certain conditions as well. So next slide, please. So this created some issues, and we're now proposing to change the bidding rules when we are in a situation when energy bids can be priced up to $2,000 a megawatt hour. So without changing the bidding rules, when the $2,000 bid cap is in place, the RDRRs could potentially be dispatched before other available resources, which we believe would be inconsistent with that CPUC settlement. So what we're proposing is to require that the real-time RDRR energy bids to be at least 95% of the $2,000 cap when we are in the situation and where we're accepting bids up to $2,000. And again, this would be, we believe, consistent with the intent of that settlement to ensure that we would exhaust bids from other resources before dispatching the RDRR resources. And to implement this, we would essentially notify the utilities when we are in that situation when we're accepting bids up to $2,000, and this would give them the option to either supply us with modified bids in the range of $1,900 or higher, or in the event that they didn't want to do that, we would just automatically scale their $1,000 bids to that $2,000 level. Next slide, please. So just a real quick example as to how this would work. So in this example, assume under the normal $1,000 market bid cap that a scheduling coordinator submitted a bid of $975. If we got into a situation that would trigger the $2,000 bid cap, we would notify the scheduling coordinator, and then they could either submit a bid between $1,900 and $2,000, or if in the event that they did not do that, we would simply take that original bid and scale it to $2,000, which would be essentially doubling it. So we would replace the $975 bid with a bid of $1,950. Next slide, please. So I think, we ran this through a stakeholder process, and stakeholders largely support the changes to the RDR bidding requirements. We got widespread agreement, particularly from the utilities and the demand response providers, that the proposal would be consistent with that CPUC settlement and the market rules related to FERC Order 831. We did receive some comments from the Department of Market Monitoring where, they had some concerns that the RDR should be allowed to submit bids below that $1,900 level when we were in the $2,000 bid cap, if they could document costs below $1,900. Again, we think our proposal is consistent with the intent of the CPUC settlement, and we also have had some further discussions with the Department of Market Monitoring. And I think what they're really recommending is that we should revisit this policy in the event that we would consider increasing that bid cap even further above that $2,000 level. And I think the concern there is that some of these resources could have marginal costs that could be below what that new bid cap level could potentially be. Next slide, please. So with that, we're requesting both the ISO Board of Governors and the Western EIM governing body approve our proposal for the RDR Bidding Enhancements. Again, we believe that this provides for the appropriate dispatch of these resources when we're accepting bids up to $2,000, and also helps to maintain the original dispatch procedures to address the costs and use limitations of these resources under the new FERC Order 831 rules. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Greg.
Oh, sorry, Roger. You go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was merely going to be a conduit. That's just to see if there's any questions. And why don't we start with the governing body?
So, Roger, this is Nita. We just got the comment letter, so we need about 5 minutes to at least read through that.
Okay. Well, we can.
And I can ask a question in the meantime if that's a possibility.
Yeah, I apologize for that delay. And yeah, please, let's go ahead and ask some questions, and then we can proceed. Go ahead, Jennifer.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Roger. And thanks very much, Greg, for the presentation. Really helpful. The question I have is really just a clarifying question because, you know, when I was reviewing the presentation materials and everything else, you really have two items here, for a lack of a better word, that are really governing the changes to these bid caps, right? You've got Order 831, but then you have that contract that you mentioned with the CPUC. And so when I look at some of the changes that were made, the bid cap of up to $2,000 per megawatt hour, that refers to the Order 831 recommendations and requirements. But the decision to allow these types of resources to bid up to $1,900 per megawatt hour, that sounds like it's really being governed by that contract with the CPUC that you referenced in your remarks. And so going back to DMM's comments, you know, it sounds like, you know, they're concerned that if these resources are not allowed to potentially bid lower than the $1,900 per megawatt hour, that we could see some inefficient market outcomes. And so specifically, DMM looks like they're concerned with these types of resources being able to be dispatched at marginal cost, and then, of course, some unintended consequences regarding those inefficient market outcomes. And so I'm just hoping you could provide a little bit more clarity around that regarding the 831 requirement versus the contract, and how the current outcome might be addressing or not addressing that particular concern from DMM regarding the marginal cost issue.
Yeah, sure. So when we look back to the settlement that was reached 10 years or so ago, you know, it really laid out, you know, certain guidelines for how these resources would be dispatched. You know, it did not set, the settlement didn't have in place that these bids would have to be, you know, 95% or higher of the bid cap. That actually came out of an ISO stakeholder process following that settlement, which was conducted in order to develop the rules for how these resources would be dispatched in a way that would be consistent with that settlement. And I think, you know, the way that we find that it's consistent with the settlement was, again, at the time, it's those two limitations to really limit the dispatch of these resources. These are, you know, generally resources that were previously under the utilities base interruptible programs. So these are resources that, you know, are not expected to be dispatched often. They're really there for emergency situations. And so in order to limit that, that's why we have the provision that they're not even, the bids for these resources aren't even submitted into the market unless we're approaching an emergency condition. And then similarly, when they are put into the market to limit the dispatch, we wanted them to be, you know, essentially at the end of the supply stack in, so near the bid cap. So when we start looking at the changes with Order 831, where we're raising that up to $2,000, again, we wanted to make sure these were at the end of the supply stack in that situation, which led us to, you know, propose the same rule. And, you know, at that time, there is a possibility that, you know, you could have, I think the concern DMM raised was that you could have marginal costs below that $2,000 level. You know, at the time of the settlement, you know, I think the acknowledgement was these costs these resources have cost, you know, well in excess of what, you know, other generation resources have. And the expectation is they were probably largely above that $1,000 and probably largely above the $2,000. And again, as we talked with DMM, I think they're comfortable with where we're at today. But if we were to, for example, under a scarcity pricing provision, raise the cap to $4,000, then I think under that situation that you might actually be getting into where you might be having a bid cap that's actually higher than the marginal cost of some of these resources. And if so, we would need provisions, and it'd be more efficient to have them bidding at their marginal cost as opposed to just at these rules, which we have in place today.
Thank you very much for that clarification, Greg.
Thank you, Jennifer. Val, I see you have your hand up.
Thanks. I think Rob had his hand up before I did.
Yeah, unfortunately, it doesn't tell me that electronically.
No, I know. But
Rob, let's go ahead with you. We're going to be fair.
Sure, I'm happy to go next. Greg, thank you for that explanation. That was excellent and very helpful. Utilities across the West have riders and agreements that they have with large suppliers on service that they provide that limit the amount of time that they can be interrupted with these types of agreements. Greg, do you have any information on how often that you've seen this applied, that's over the last year, the last 2 years, the last 5 years? The frequency is what I'm looking for. Is this something that you're seeing just once or twice a year, or are you seeing that these having to be used or implemented more frequently than that?
Yeah, generally these are dispatched, very infrequently. I think once or twice a year is probably fairly accurate. We do tend to dispatch these when we get into those, very tight supply situations. August 2020, I think we definitely dispatched them at that time. And then I'm trying to remember if we dispatched them when we got to that peak situation on July 9th as well. But, it is very infrequent when we dispatch these. We essentially have to the ISO has to get into an EEA2, Emergency Alert Level 2 situation before we even put these bids into the market or would be looking to dispatch them. So, it's very infrequently when these are used. And again, these are special demand response resources. We also have our normal demand response model, which are the PDR proxy demand resources that, are not under these types of restrictions for their use.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. And I think that goes a long ways towards understanding how critical it is on the application of the rule that you proposed it, as opposed to even considering something less than. And I think your explanation as to why you want to keep it at the end of any type of dispatch stack and how you ensure that happens, I think is explained well. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you, Rob. Let's next go to Val Fong for your comments and questions.
Thanks, Roger. Greg, thank you very much for this presentation. Now, for my very simple mind, I just wanted to perhaps get verification that these RDRRs really are bid into the market by what otherwise could be fairly inelastic demand. And this is not, for instance, forced outages like when utilities have to take out circuits, for instance, to meet ISO requirements for reliability. Is that correct?
That's correct. These are largely large industrial customers that have agreed to interrupt their service, in limited instances, and in exchange, essentially, they get, a different retail rate as a result of that. The utilities also have other programs that are under this, such as AC cycling, those types of things, and there's also some agricultural program under this framework.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you. Member Prescott, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I do. Thanks, Greg, for the presentation, and I just want to make sure that I understand the nexus with the energy imbalance market. And I think I've asked you this before, and it really is the fact that if the other EIM entities had such resources, they would be able to bid those into the energy imbalance market under these rules. Is that correct?
That's correct. We don't currently have any of these resources outside of outside of the California PUC jurisdiction, but it is possible. We did write the tariff in a way that these provisions could apply to other entities as well. So it is open to EIM balancing authority areas if sometime in the future they decided they wanted to develop a similar product, this would enable them to do so.
That's great. I see that as a definite market enhancement. So thanks again.
Thank you, John. Governor Borenstein, you have your hand up.
Yeah, so I'm trying to just understand the actual mechanics here. The utility runs this program. They have some deal, which is not our business as the CAISO, with these large industrial customers. They bid in something that is demand reduction, but I'm trying to understand who determines the demand reduction starting point, the baseline, and is that just between the utility and is this the utility's bid of demand for the utility into the CAISO that we just help them set at a certain level for this bit? I'm trying to figure out how we.
So the utilities are essentially the scheduling coordinator for the resource.
Right.
So they're bidding in the resource. They bid in the quantity of the demand response as well as the price under these conditions. And when you think back to the settlement, I think the settlement which the ISO was part of, as well as those large electric consumers, the demand response providers part of that settlement, and the utilities, all in agreement there as to again, how the utility as the scheduling coordinator would be offering them into the market. And, we're trying to, maintain that relationship in this proposal here when we go to the $2,000 cap.
And can I so how does CAISO verify that this, quote, resource has performed as instructed when it is called?
That's a good question. We do, after we've called them, we can go back and look at how much response we actually received, relative to what was bid in and dispatched to the market. We go back and look at metering data, that type of thing, and there is, a way to do analysis as to how effective the resources were in meeting their dispatch.
Well, I guess to do that, though, we need to know how one would measure the reduction. And so does CAISO actually know for a given resource what they are reducing from, what the baseline is?
Yeah, and I think it actually varies by resource as to, what baseline they're using. And, I think for some of these, it's measured based on when the dispatch was given, the meter read before and after, whereas others have baselines, for example, on the AC cycling programs that we can see, reductions from there as well.
Okay. I have expressed concerns in the past about these sorts of payments for demand reduction, but I think I see this as a problem at the CPUC that the utilities and the CPUC need to work out. But given the settlement and given their contracts, it seems like this is a completely appropriate move by CAISO to adapt to them. Thanks.
Roger, you're muted.
Sorry about that, as we all do at times. Thank you, Governor Borenstein. And I'm just checking whether there's any other comments or questions from the governing body or the board? Not seeing any more hands raised at this time.
Roger, this is Anita. So for the record, we've had a chance to read the letter, and it is supportive of this initiative. So I appreciate the time to do that.
Thank you, Chair Decker. And again, we apologize for the confusion in that, quite frankly, and we've reached out to the author of the letter as well and let them know our apologies. We typically have been so used to sending those in our online system to the board that we did not send it to the governing body, but we will definitely make sure we don't do that again. And if now at this point, seeing no other comments, operator, if we can check for public comments.
All right, once again, if you would like to make a public comment, please click on the raise hand icon. Please state your name and affiliation before asking your question or making your comment. And with that, we'll go ahead and go to our first public comment. Please go ahead.
Commenter, you may be on the...
Good afternoon. My name is Greg Wickler, and I'm the Executive Director of the California Efficiency and Demand Management Council. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Thank you for the opportunity to address the CAISO Board of Governors and the Western EIM governing body on the CAISO's RDR Bidding Enhancements Track 1 Stakeholder Initiative. I'd like to also thank the CAISO staff for moving this initiative forward as quickly as they have to ensure compliance with FERC Order 831 while preserving the appropriate role of RDRRs as emergency resources to be deployed when reliability and market conditions are most extreme. The Council acknowledges the choice the CAISO faced in complying with Order 831 while preserving the parameters and role of the RDRR product. Order 831 requires resources bidding above the soft cap to base their bids on verifiable costs. However, the CAISO recognizes the fundamental nature of DR often renders its marginal costs extremely difficult to calculate. CAISO rightly continues to observe the provisions of the settlement agreement approved in the CPUC decision 10-06-034, to which the CAISO was a party. This settlement agreement recognized that customers participating in RDRR have a high strike price well above the running cost of conventional resources. Therefore, we believe the proposed tariff revisions are consistent with CAISO's commitments and recommend to the board and the governing body that these proposals be approved. So thanks once again for the opportunity to provide this oral statement. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Wickler? Thank you, Greg, for your comments. Any other public comment?
Yeah, we do have one more public comment in queue. Please go ahead.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
We can now.
Okay, great. Good afternoon, ISO Board of Governors and EIM governing body. This is John Dipp from Southern California Edison. Just wanted to mention that SE fully supports RDR bidding enhancements, which raises the bid cap to 2,000 megawatts and aligns with order number 831. SE is requesting that CAISO implement these enhancements at the beginning of summer, so that these changes are effective for all summer months when the potential for dispatching RDRs are highest for emergency only situation. ST is also requesting CAISO to expedite the implementation of other enhancements, which will provide market participants the ability to reflect RDR's operating capabilities. The enhancements that I'm talking about is Track 2, which basically addresses vulnerabilities to infeasible dispatches that Track 2 would address. So we are requesting for that to be expedited and aligned with these enhancements for raising the bid cap. So.
Thank you. Any questions for? Oh, thank you. Sorry. Any questions for Mr. Dipp?
Well, actually, Greg, this is Ash Bhagwat, what is the timeline for implementing the track 1 enhancements?
That's for you, Greg Cook.
Yeah, we'll be looking to implement those. I believe by June 1st is what we're looking at, trying to get them in place by this summer.
Thanks.
Thank you. Any other public comment?
We have no further public comments at this time.
Excellent. Thank you. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to our CEO, Elliot Mainzer.
Thank you, Roger. I just want to offer one just brief observation, sort of bigger picture. I appreciated the line of inquiry on this segment. Those are really good questions, getting to the heart of a key issue. You know, we are very focused and very sensitive right now to the issues around price formation in our market, and I think this is sort of a special case here where you have a resource, as Greg Wickler's indicated, is dispatchable only under emergency conditions. All right, we generally hit this when we're in a stage 2 emergency. This is sort of a resource of last resort that the ISO dispatches, and the pricing, as you've seen, is a function of a settlement agreement with the CPUC. As we go forward and we look at the continued evolution of demand response in California, we're going to continue looking for ways to make sure that the participation of those resources in our market continues to be as rational as possible. And also we're very, very, I think, encouraged and very motivated to try to see demand response play a bigger and bigger role inside the state. But we want to try to get a swath of demand response resources that are accessible to us well before we get into stage 2 kind of condition. We want preemptive, deep stack of demand response that can actually help mitigate getting us into reliability consequences rather than hitting when we're right up against the edge. So that's a big focus for us as well. And I just appreciate the support and the understanding of where we're headed with this specific case. So thank you.
Thank you, Elliot. Any last comments or questions from the board or the governing body? Otherwise, I will go to a motion. Excellent. Seeing none, move that the ISO Board of Governors and WEIM governing body approve the Reliability Demand Response Resource Bidding Enhancements proposal as described in the memorandum dated March 9, 2022, and move that the ISO Board of Governors and the WEIM governing body authorize management to make all necessary and appropriate filings with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to implement the proposal described in the memorandum, including any filings that implement the overarching initiative policy but contain discrete revisions to incorporate Commission guidance in any initial ruling on the proposed tariff amendment. Can I have a motion, please?
This is Val. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Angelina, go ahead.
Thanks, Val. Okay.
Okay, Angelina's moved, and second?
I'll second. This is Val.
Thank you, Val. And Chair Bhagwat, your vote, please.
Aye.
Governor Borenstein?
Aye.
Chair Decker?
Aye.
Member Fong?
Yes.
Governor Galizova?
Aye.
Member Gardner?
Yes.
Vice Chair Konzioka?
Aye.
Vice Chair Leslie?
Aye.
Member Prescott?
Aye.
And Governor Shorey?
Aye.
Thank you, governors and members of the board of the governing body. The motion has passed. The next item on our agenda, item number 7, is the decision on short-term and long-start unit definitions. And let me again turn it to Anna Mckenna, our Vice President of Market Policy and Performance. Anna?
Thank you, Roger, and good afternoon again. I am pleased to present to you the decision item on short and long-term definitions in our tariff. This again comes to you as a joint decisional item, and it is a clarification that we have received a lot of support for. And Greg Cook, Executive Director of Market and Infrastructure Policy, will be walking you through the details. And with that, I believe Greg is still on the line. Greg, please take us away.
All right. Well, hello again. So, yeah, we're proposing to modify the tariff definitions for short start and long start units. This also falls under the joint authority of the Western EIM governing body and board, as this is applicable across the entire market. Go to the next slide. So we're proposing to update the definitions again of short and long start units, and in particular to align with the way that they're currently utilized in our markets. And it's important because the short and long start unit definitions determine which resources can be started in the day ahead and real-time markets, where the short start units determines which units can be started in the real-time market, while long start units are units that can only be started by the day ahead market. And so currently in our tariff, it states that 300 minutes is used to define the demarcation point between those short and long start units. However, the way that our markets are currently configured, the day ahead and real time markets use 255 minute cycling time to determine again which market is able to issue those unit commitments to either the short start or the long start units. So next slide, please. So we're simply proposing to update the definitions to align with the current implementation of the ISO markets. So what we're proposing is to change that definition of short start unit cycling time. And when it's talking about cycling time, that's really the startup time plus the minimum run time of the unit. And currently that's set in the tariff as 300 minutes or less. What we're proposing is to, again, to align that as to how it's implemented in the market, which would be at 255 minutes or less. And then likewise for the long start units, where it's currently greater than 300 minutes, we would change that to be greater than 255 minutes, so a 45-minute change. And this resolves a few issues we currently have, in particular commitment as well as RAIM issues. And if you recall, RAIM is our Resource Adequacy Availability Incentive Mechanism, which essentially requires short start resource adequacy units to bid into the real-time market. But this was an issue if you had a unit that could have fallen between that 255 and 300 minutes. So now by clarifying this, that it resolves that issue as well as clarifies which units can be committed in which market. And we're also taking the opportunity to clean up, do some tariff cleanup as well, because in our proposal we're proposing to remove the definitions for both fast and medium start units because those are not used in the market. And the reason why is that ability to start a resource in the real-time market is covered by that short start unit definition. Next slide, please. So we ran this through a very quick stakeholder process, and stakeholders support the proposal to align the tariff with the existing implementation. We did get one request for some additional clarification with variable startup times or with multi-state generators. We did provide that additional guidance in the draft final proposal, essentially that we will use the longest startup time would be considered when establishing whether they fall into the short or long start definitions. Next slide, please. So with that, we're requesting that the ISO Board of Governors and the Western EIM governing body approve our proposal to update the definitions for short and long start units so that we can align the tariff with the existing implementation and resolve both our compliance gap with how the day-ahead and real-time market are implemented along with the tariff. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from the board or the governing body? Rob Konzioka, it looks like you had your hand up first.
Yes, I beat Val out by a second there. Greg, it's more of a comment than a question at this point. I was going to ask you about maybe concerns regarding many of the legacy units that are out there. I think this was a really good initiative in doing this cleanup of the definitions and getting alignment so that it's consistent all the way through the software and the tariff, and you should be commended for that. And the question I had was on those legacy units, that there is some variability there, especially, depending upon where they are as being cold or warm. or how long they've gotten there. And I believe you addressed it on a previous slide that you addressed those clarifications. And I just want to let you know that I appreciate that you covered that in your presentation to let us know that's been resolved. And so thank you.
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you, Rob. Val?
I don't think I ever want to play Jeopardy with Rob because he would beat me out at the buzzer every time.
I'm glad you said it and I didn't, so.
Okay. Greg, thank you very much for this presentation. I'm definitely voting in support of this. I think it's always advisable to get rid of gaps in definitions, and so I'm definitely all for this.
Any other comments or questions from the board or the governing body? Thank you. At this time, can we check for public comment, please, operator?
Once again, if you would like to make a public comment, please click on the raise hand icon. Then when you are unmuted, please state your name and affiliation before making your comment. All right, looks like we have no public comments at this time.
Thank you, operator. At this time, let me go forward with the motion. Move that the ISO Board of Governors and the WEIM governing body approve the changes to the short start unit and long start unit definitions as described in the memorandum dated March 9, 2022. And move that the ISO Board of Governors and the WEIM governing body authorize management to make all necessary and appropriate filings with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to implement the proposal described in the memorandum, including any filings that implement the overarching initiative policy, but contain discrete revisions to incorporate Commission guidance and any initial ruling on the proposed tariff amendment. Have a motion, please.
So moved. Is Prescott?
Thank
Rob,
you, John.
that motion.
Rob had second. Thank you. And Chair Bhagwat, your vote, please.
Aye.
Governor Borenstein.
Aye.
Chair Decker.
Aye.
Member Fong.
Yes.
Governor Golitseva.
Aye.
Member Gardner.
Aye.
Vice Chair Konzioka.
Aye.
Vice Chair Leslie.
Aye.
Member Prescott.
Aye.
And Governor Shorey.
Aye.
Thank you, governors and governing body members. The motion does pass. Next, we have agenda item number 8, the briefing on policy initiatives. And for that, again, to you, Anna Mckenna.
Thank you, Roger, and good afternoon again. I'm happy to be providing you a briefing today on 3 policy initiatives that are pending and that we are working on. I'll be touching on the transmission service and market scheduling priorities, a little bit on EDAN, and finally on resource efficiency evaluation enhancements. With regards to the transmission service and market scheduling priorities, you might recall that we started on this effort last year and implemented an interim proposal and recently asked for your approval and received your approval to extend it for 2 years. We today got an order from the Commission, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, to implement the extension for the next 2 years, and so that will provide a seamless transition to summer for our participants. We also have been working since late last year on the second phase of this effort, which is to come up with and formulate a long-term durable solution for transmission reservations and scheduling priorities. We've conducted a series of working group meetings, and through that we received a lot of input. We had a number of our neighboring DAAs come and participants come to the working group meeting, provide us information, sharing information from their own systems, and helping us formulate some of the essential elements. We're now in the process of formulating our straw proposal and have engaged OATI to help us to do so and leverage their expertise and their knowledge across the industry with regards to these matters. And we hope to be able to provide a comprehensive straw proposal later this spring so that we can then engage in our iterative stakeholder process to develop the final proposal by later this year. At this point, that's pretty much all I have to report with this the next phase, but wanted to share with you that we're quite engaged in this process to make sure that we have something we can implement by the time the extension expires in 2 years. The next item I'm going to touch on is the extended day-ahead market. And I won't spend too much time on this because on Friday we have a open stakeholder meeting for everyone to attend, in which we'll be wrapping up our current efforts and then sharing our next steps on this. But just as a little bit of a summary, we've had a good number of working group meetings that we have been conducting on the essentially three areas of the design elements on the resource efficiency evaluation, transmission, contributions, as well as the GHG requirements of the EDAM. These working groups are literally wrapping up this week. As I noted on Friday, we'll have a wrap-up meeting with all stakeholders. We'll be sharing some of the conceptual, at a conceptual level, at a higher level, some of the conclusions that seem to be coalescing around, and then what our next steps are. So we're doing some good progress in this area. These meetings have been very productive, very constructive, but we still have some more work to do, and I wanted to share with you all and stakeholders that as we then post the comprehensive straw proposal, we'll be engaging in a continued iterative, robust stakeholder process consisting of comments and proposals and additional meetings where we will be discussing those proposals as they be formulated, with the hope that we can come with a final proposal later this year. And I do want to encourage everyone to participate in Friday's meeting and also, to continue to stay engaged in the stakeholder process, because I truly do believe that our final product, our final design will be better and vastly better because of the input that we receive from stakeholders. The last item I was going to touch on is to provide you an update on the WEIM resource efficiency evaluation enhancements that we've been conducting now for some time. As you may recall, it wasn't too long ago, last month, you approved a series of changes for enhancing the resource efficiency evaluation. These were changes that we brought to you under what was characterized as our phase 1 effort on the resource efficiency evaluation. We also have a phase 1B effort, which we are currently engaged in. The 1B effort is taking a deeper dive on some of the critical elements related to the evaluation, where we will be looking at conducting some additional analysis. We're well into that process, and we'll be and already started engaging with stakeholders and continuing that process. In phase 1B, we'll be touching on the load conformance implications, the uncertainty measurements that we've I've been looking at, as well as any implications of EI transfers. Phase 2, we were going to be looking a little bit deeply into the consequences of failure. And that's an area that we had initially anticipated we were going to be starting later this year, but for reasons I will mention shortly, we're thinking now of bringing up the phase 2 efforts because it seems like that's an important implication. So what that particular question pertains to is when an entity fails a resource efficiency evaluation, what are the consequences? Under today's rules, if an entity fails, they're limited to the last transfer that they received from the EIM in those intervals. And what we have come to realize based on our past year's efforts is that many WEIM participants strongly feel that perhaps these consequences aren't the right consequences. And in fact, you yourselves at the last meeting, cautioned us that the freezing of transfers could have reliability implications, and that as we consider these issues, that we should be very cautious not to cause additional reliability issues. So what we have done in the past 3 weeks since we last spoke is that we are looking very closely at a proposal that was put forth by a joint EIM entities who expressed some concern with regards to the current freezing of transfers And this proposal would be an interim proposal that we're looking at to see whether we can implement, as early perhaps as, this summer. And this proposal is an interim measure for us to implement until we have an opportunity to really dig deeper into the phase 2 effort on the consequences of failures we were hoping to consider. The proposal essentially is that it would give an option to entities to consider either continuing to be frozen or, current rules where you're limited in your transfers when you fail, or you can choose to have a financial consequences at about $2,000. Well, it's a bid cap, which is a $2,000 current bid cap. We're considering this proposal very carefully. We received comments this past Monday. We're looking at the comments, and as a preliminary assessment of what we can see at this point, we see that there is support and interest in pursuing this interim proposal with caveats and concerns in some areas. And so definitely we're taking a little bit of a very close look to the proposal and very seriously considering whether we can implement it sooner. And some of the caution and concerns that the participants have raised have to do with potentially creating additional reliability issues if we switch from the current freezing of transfers to a financial consequence. There's a lot of questions around this. For example, one of the EIM entities, noted that although they're open to the approach, they also want to make sure that when you switch over to a financial consequence, you're not creating disincentives for long-term procurement, and you still need to consider that. And also, they noted that you don't want to create shortfalls. You don't want to create negative reliability impacts on those BAAs that are not short by those entities that do fail. So these are the kind of questions we're looking into. We had some other folks who said, hey, we're open to this, we really like this idea, but there's essential design elements that need to be incorporated before you do it. And then we had some other WEIM entities that also noted that, hey, maybe we don't want to do it right away, but we're open to the idea and consider it further. So what we're doing right now is we're going to hold a stakeholder meeting actually next week where we're going to look at the proposal a little bit more deeply. Staff has been working on looking at the elements of this, and hopefully we'll get a better visibility as to what we can implement later this year if there's a feasibility. There are two principles that we're looking at very closely. One is, of course, what you all advised us on last month, which is to make sure whatever changes we make do not impose or cause additional reliability issues. And the second principle is implementability, because an implementation, not just from the ISO side, but from market participant sides as well. So that at this point is my summary of where we're at with these elements. I'll be happy to answer any questions on any of the three items.
Thank you, Anna. I see that, Jennifer, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Roger. And thanks again, Anna, for this presentation. Really helpful to hear how some of these high priority initiatives are moving forward. My question is pretty limited. It's actually focused on what is occurring with the transmission reservations and scheduling priorities initiative. Really happy to hear that you guys are moving along with those work groups and developing that more durable long-term solution that would be implemented after our interim approach, which is, of course, in effect for 2 years. You did mention that the next step includes developing that straw proposal with the help of input from the working group, as well as OATI. And I'm curious, because this sounds like a unique partnership. I haven't heard of the ISO working with OATI on past stakeholder initiatives. So I'd love to hear just a little bit more about that partnership and what type of expertise you are looking to OATI for. I can certainly take a guess. They're knowledgeable in terms of the bilateral framework that we have outside of California in the West, but I'm sure there's more to it than that. So would love to hear more details on that partnership.
Absolutely, and you are certainly right to note that this is a sort of a unique arrangement that we don't normally do this. there are several things that OATI offers. As you noted, they have, quite a bit of expertise in the bilateral framework markets that we deal with and our neighbors. They also have a lot of expertise with regards to how other ISOs and RTOs conduct these kind of businesses. And they have deep expertise in the available transmission calculation. And so as well as actually significant expertise on our own systems, right, and the CAISO systems and the CAISO market. So it's that blend of expertise that we felt really provided an opportunity for us to, benefit from their expertise, but also an opportunity for us to alleviate some of the concerns parties may have with regards to reinventing the wheel in this space, if you wish. So we received a lot of input from our participants, and in so doing, as to how they conduct their business. We're trying to create a system where you're not creating seams across the bilateral markets and the ISO, but you're creating fluidity of service where parties feel like they're getting equivalent service across those two markets. And so that's the basic reasons for engaging with OATI. We also are very busy right now, as you all know, and so are stakeholders. And so we wanted to, inject a little bit more power into this up front in the straw proposal and get that validity up front by partners such as OATI.
Wonderful. Thanks for that clarification.
Thank you. Mary, you have your hand up?
Yes, thank you. And I just want to thank you for that overview. That was really helpful. And I think Jennifer asked the transmission question as regards to EDM. I just have a question about how's the GHG working group, where, at a high level, where did you get consensus? How do you think that's shaping up?
Yes, definitely. And so the working group has, I think yesterday or tomorrow is the last day of the working group. I would say that there's several areas that we've explored deeply in the GHG working group where I wouldn't say there's consensus around a particular model, but I do think there has been a lot of work and movement and understanding on the adoption of a resource-specific approach that was similar to what we have in place today. And there's a lot of discussion about the merits of a more zonal approach for accounting for the GHG. And I think it's not yet resolved. I wouldn't say there's consensus. I think there's still a lot of strong opinions on both sides. But we're hoping that with the information we've received, we can provide a viable sort of approach to that. And a lot of the GHG discussions are also obviously influenced by some of the changes in the other states as we look at Washington's changes coming in and how we may also be implementing those in the WEIM in the near term, because those have to be implemented sooner. So the discussion was really helpful, and from what I can surmise, but I don't think I would say that we have a final proposal. And I will say that part of the working group, the goal of the working group was not necessarily to come up with a final proposal, here it is, but to collect all the information and input we need to then start piecing those things together and then providing a platform by which, having participated in all those discussions, understanding all the different pushes and pulls, parties can really understand the proposal we put forward that reflects an approach that's just and reasonable, if you wish, and equilibrates all those factors. And so I'm not disheartened by the fact that there isn't a final proposal, but I think there's been a lot of good work done as to the different formulations folks have been considering.
Thank you.
Chair Decker, your hand is raised.
Yes, I have a comment and a question for Anna. So I'm really happy to see OITI working in this space, because so many of the utilities, that is who they're familiar with, they understand what to kind of expect from them, and I think they're a great partner to kind of bridge some of the things that we've heard from stakeholders in regard to the transmission scheduling and the wheel-through issues. So I applaud you guys for that. In regard to the resource sufficiency and the proposal, and looking at how fast can something be implemented, and will there be unintended consequences, and is there an ability to kind of do some scenarios that would help the stakeholders kind of see what would happen in either past circumstances or running some scenarios going forward, so that they can actually see what could be the impact of the financial consequence versus kind of staying where we are?
Well, there's always, the possibility to do those kind of scenarios, and timing is always the question. We are coming to a situation here where, we're getting tight on time, and there was a concern and a desire to have this in place by this summer, and that it just depends, where we're at. Now, I will say that, we don't like to implement anything where we haven't had an opportunity to really evaluate what the consequences are and what the scenarios are. So that's part of the conversation we're having with stakeholders as to, what it is exactly we can and can't implement and how testable that is.
Any other
thank
questions?
you for your Thank you for your comments on the OETI engagement. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Anna. Any other comments or questions from the Board of Governors or the WEIM governing body? Seeing none, operator, can you check and see if there are any public comments?
Once again, if you would like to make a public comment, please click on the raise hand icon at the bottom of the Zoom window. And it looks like we have no public comments at this time.
Thank you, operator. Our last agenda item is for the board or the governing body to raise any future agenda items. Is there anything from the board or the governing body on future agenda items? Hearing none, we will adjourn our meeting. Thank you, governing body. Thank you, Board of Governors. Appreciate your time today.